There is no small talk in a cancer waiting room. And then my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I found myself sitting in one for 33 days in a row. Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Stevick Rust. 40 years of sitting with people through their hardest moments has taught me one thing. Our power lives in our courage to be real. This is where we stop pretending and we find our way back to ourselves. I'm glad you're here. Now pull up a chair. This is Becoming Real. There's no small talk in a cancer waiting room. Maybe you already know that. Maybe you've sat in one. Maybe you've held someone's hand walking through a door you weren't sure you were ready to walk through. I didn't know. Not the way I know it now. I'm a clinical health psychologist. I've spent decades sitting across from people in hospital rooms, waiting rooms, therapy rooms, through their most vulnerable and painful moments. So, of course, I thought I really understood something about fear, health, and life, and about what people do with it, about how we behave when life gets hard and the bottom drops out from under us. And then my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer, stage 3. And I suddenly found myself sitting in a waiting room, 33 days in a row, waiting for his radiation treatments, waiting to go home, waiting to feel normal for a few hours, and then coming back and doing it all again. And the cancer waiting room taught me something I was not expecting. Not about cancer or medicine, and honestly, not even about my husband, although that's a whole other conversation. It taught me something about us human beings, and what we are actually capable of with one another, and how rarely we let ourselves get there. And that's what I want to talk about today. Let me ask you to think about the last time you sat in a waiting room, any waiting room. What did you do? If you're like most people, and I include myself in this, you found something to look at that wasn't another person. Your phone, a magazine, the middle distance, placing yourself in a seat safe and a respectable distance from each other. I get it. There are practical personal space boundaries, germs, etc. You maybe nodded when someone walked in. Maybe you held the door if someone was close behind you. You were polite. You were appropriate. And you kept your distance. And most of us aren't doing that because we don't care. We do it because that's the unspoken social contract, the one we all agreed to without ever being asked to sign it. We move through public spaces behind what I think of as the performance of wellness, the carefully managed surface, the fine thanks, the busy but good answer. We smile and we nod and we stay in our lane. And the truth is, most of the time, we're grateful when other people do the same. Psychologists call one piece of this social buffering. It's the way we use surface interactions, small talk, pleasantries, and the familiar script to manage our own anxiety. Because real contact is vulnerable, and we know that. And who the heck wants to be vulnerable all the time, or even some of the time, or maybe never? Yep, that fits for most of us. Being truly seen by a stranger, especially in a medical setting, is particularly uncomfortable. And saying or sharing what's actually true, like, I'm scared, I'm exhausted, I don't know how this will end, feels like too much to put on someone who didn't really ask for all of that. And that makes sense and would probably be really weird if we went the other way. So we protect ourselves and we protect each other, and we call it being appropriate. Now, I'm not criticizing it, and sometimes I agree it's appropriate and necessary. But maybe there's an argument to be made for not letting that be our only strategy, which leads to disconnection when it's used with a broad brush in all areas of our lives. Okay, so back to the waiting room. Now, let me add to my story that before the radiation treatments, there was surgery for my husband, Jay. And I sat in that surgical waiting room for hours, waiting for the surgeon to come out, waiting to hear how Jay did, what they found, whether we could be hopeful again. It was one of the longest mornings of my life. And the waiting room looked exactly like what I described. People on their phones, eyes down, the quiet, careful distance of strangers who had all agreed without speaking not to look at each other too directly. I understood it. I was doing it too. There was something about holding it together in that room that felt necessary. Like if I stayed very still and very contained, everything would be okay. We were all afraid in that room, and we were all alone in it together. I didn't think much about it at that time. It was only later, sitting in a very different kind of waiting room, that I understood what had been missing. I kept thinking, what if the armor we wear in ordinary life isn't protecting us from what we think it is? Now, my husband's radiation treatments were 33 consecutive days. Every morning, we drove an hour to the hospital. Every morning, that sliding door opened, and every morning, especially those first few mornings, we felt it. The weight of what we were walking into, the fear we were both trying not to show each other, the holding of hands that said everything neither of us was saying out loud, holding in the tears long enough to get back into the car. But what I didn't expect on the very first day was the experience that we would have and how it changed us when it all ended. Now let me paint the picture. Before you walked through the glass doors, there was an entire wall of photographs, young and old, black and white, Native American, men, children, women, and beside each face, their own words about their cancer. Raw ones, hope and desperation and gratitude all pressed tightly together. I found it hard to take my eyes off the images and the honest, raw messages. Now, just past the photos was the large sliding glass doors that brought you into the reception waiting area. And there was always two women behind the front desk. I'll never forget them. They looked up when we walked in, and they didn't just greet us. They welcomed us. They called us by name, like we had walked into someone's home. They had this look, I can only describe it as a knowing look, that said, "We see you, we know what you're carrying, and you're safe here with us, even for a little while." They offered us hot coffee, water, a warm blanket. And it sounds simple when I say it out loud, but in that moment, it wasn't simple at all. Those small acts of dignity and compassion made me feel like they saw us. They really saw us. Jay was not just a chart, not a case number, but a person. And they were going to take care of us. And for the next 32 days, they continued to greet us by name, asking about both of us, the patient and the caregiver. Now, I wasn't expected to cry on day one of radiation, but there I was. We took our seats, and Jay began to drink his fluids and engage in his prep for the procedure. Smiling, greeting, and welcoming us into the space that they had been in for many days, weeks, and for some, beyond. They nodded to Jay when they saw him getting another bottle of water. I saw one man reach over and gently touch the arm of another man who was struggling. He just got up and changed chairs so he could sit near him. I assumed that they knew each other, but while they had never met, it was clear they knew each other. On day 2, Jay was greeted by a woman who asked how his first treatment went. Not in the way you ask someone as a greeting of how are you, like in passing, hoping they'll say fine and the niceties can end, but in the tone, eye contact, and body language that says, I really want to know. The way somebody knows how important the simple asking of the question can be. And Jay answered honestly, and that was the beginning. By the end of the first week, that waiting room had become something I have almost no other word for except real. People talked about nausea, diarrhea, pain without apology, about fatigue and burning and the indignities that come with cancer treatment that nobody tells you about ahead of time. They talked about fear, not the sanitized version, but the 3 a.m. version, the kind that sits on your chest and won't move. And nobody flinched. Nobody looked away. Nobody changed the subject. Nobody said, well, at least, or stay positive, or any of the things we say when we don't know what else to say, and we just want the conversation to end. They just listened, and then they shared back. I watched a woman pull a small case out of her bag and pass around a particular brand of ginger chews that had helped her with the nausea. She brought enough for everyone. I watched a man describe in careful detail the ice pack he found that helped with the burning because someone else had just mentioned they couldn't find anything that worked. I watched people compare notes on sleep, on appetite, on what their spouses were and weren't saying at home. God even came up, naturally, without awkwardness. Life came up, what people wanted to go back to, what they were afraid they might not ever get to do again, what they had put off for far too long. And then there were children. One woman brought her kids, little ones who sat in the corner coloring, quiet in that particular way children get when they sense the adults around them are carrying something heavy. They colored carefully. They waited. And when the door opened and their mom walked back out from her treatment, the littlest one, I can still hear her, ran across the room every single time, every single day, and asked the same question. Is the cancer gone now, Mommy? I don't have words for what it did to that room when she asked that. Everyone heard it. And her mother would kneel down and hold her and say something soft, and the rest of us wouldn't look away. We took it in. We felt it, all of it, without saying a word. We let it settle. That's something that almost never happens in ordinary life. The willingness to just be present in someone else's hard moment without flinching or fixing or filling the silence. Children have a way of asking the questions the rest of us are just simply too careful or too afraid to say out loud. And then there was the bell. If you've been in a cancer treatment center, you know about the bell. When a patient completes their course of treatment, they ring it. And everyone, and I mean everyone in that room, stops what they're doing and claps. Not politely, not the way you applaud at the end of a performance out of obligation. The kind of clapping that comes from somewhere deep that says, this is important. The kind that says, I know what this cost you. I was here, and I'm so glad for you. The staff gathered every time. They came out behind the desk and stood together and honored each person as they rang that bell, like a ceremony, like it deserved to be one. On Jay's last day, day 33, I had arranged secretly for family and some of our closest friends to be there for the bell ringing. They showed up to witness him ringing the bell, to stand in that room and be present for that moment when nothing else in the world was more important than this man, this day, this life that we were so grateful to still be living. He rang the bell. Strangers who had sat with us for 33 mornings clapped and cheered like they had known us for years, because in the way that matters, in the way that room made possible, they had. Nobody was performing in that room. They clapped for him and for the hope that the bell represented for them. Nobody in that waiting room was just fine. They were real. And it was the least lonely I had felt in a long time. In psychology, there's a concept we talk about called post-traumatic growth. You may have heard of it. The idea, first researched by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, is that people who go through significant hardships sometimes don't just recover, they change. They report a deeper appreciation for life, closer relationships, a greater sense of personal strength, and sometimes a spiritual deepening. But here's what I think gets missed in the popular version of that idea. Post-traumatic growth doesn't happen because of the trauma. It happens because of what the trauma removes. It removes the luxury of pretending. When you're sitting in a cancer waiting room, the usual reasons you give yourself for not being real with people. I don't want to burden anyone. It's not the right time. They probably don't want to hear it. I should hold it together. Those reasons simply evaporate. They just do, because the situation has already made everything visible. The fear is already in the room. The stakes are already named. And so people stop spending energy on the performance and start spending it on each other. What I watched in that waiting room wasn't a group of unusually brave or unusually open people. It was ordinary people who had been released, at least temporarily, by circumstances, from the social contracts that usually keep us at arm's length from one another. And what happened when those contracts were suspended? More genuine kindness, generosity, authentic curiosity about another person's life, the kind of community that most of us say we want and rarely actually experience or participate in. We know that chronic loneliness, the persistent sense of disconnection from others, is one of the most significant health risks a human being can face. More damaging over time than smoking, more damaging than obesity. It affects the immune system, the cardiovascular system, and the brain. We are simply not wired for the kind of surface contact we have trained ourselves to accept. That waiting room wasn't extraordinary because people had cancer. It was extraordinary because people were finally getting what they were wired to need: real connections. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, though. No quick and cheap or trite conclusions here, because the easy version of the story could end with something like cherish every moment, life is short, and tell people you love them. And yes, of course, all of that is true. But I don't think it's enough. And I think it lets us off the hook too easily. Because here's the harder truth that I keep coming back to. Those people in the waiting room didn't learn how to be real with each other. They already knew how. We all do. What changed was they ran out of reasons not to. And that's what I think is worth sitting with. The question worth asking isn't why can't every connection or conversation be like that? Because that's not realistic and it misses the point anyways. The real question is this: what are we protecting ourselves from in ordinary life that we so willingly give up when we're in a crisis? What is the protective armor we put on daily actually costing us? Because I don't think the armor is free. I think we pay for it every time we ask someone how they're doing and don't really wait for the answer. Every time something is hard and we say we're fine because it seems like less trouble. Every time we feel lonely in a room full of people and we tell ourselves, that's just how it is. That's just not how it is. That's a choice we're making, usually without realizing we're making it, to stay safe instead of staying connected. I, like many of you, have probably made that choice 1,000 times. But I sat in the room for 33 days and I watched what happens when people stop making that choice. And I can't unknow what I saw. We drove home for the last time on day 33, and I looked out the window and thought about every person who had walked through that sliding door with us. The woman who brought the blankets from home, the man who told us about his grandchildren on day 4 with a kind of fierce tenderness I will never forget. The little girl who ran across the room every morning to ask if the cancer was gone yet. The staff who remembered our names. The bell. The clapping that sounded like something holy. Now, every 3 months, we go back for blood tests. We hold our breath in the days before, we wait for the numbers, and we pray quietly. And sometimes we try not to show each other how scared we are. And at other times, it's what we simply acknowledge as our new normal. But when we walk back in for those appointments, I find myself glancing through the doorway into the waiting room. There are new faces now, people who are on day 1, day 3, day 7, carrying what we carried, sitting with what we sat with. And sometimes there are faces I recognize, people still on the journey. And we exchange that look, the one that doesn't need words, the one that says, I know, I see you. Now, you don't have to sit in a cancer waiting room to take something from this. And I truly hope, and I mean this, that your life steers you and the people you love far away from them. But I do believe there is always a gift in hidden places. Not in suffering itself, I want to be clear about that, but a gift that finds us in the strangest places if we're paying attention, if we're willing to receive it. That waiting room was the place for me, the gift. And here's what I want to leave you with. As I wrote and prepared this podcast, I've been thinking a lot about what I actually want you to walk away with, because this kind of thing can land beautifully, maybe feel inspirational, and then just dissolve or create unexplained anxiety for you. Maybe you get back in your car, you go about your day, and this episode becomes a nice story you heard once. I don't want that. So let me give you these 3 things, specific things, small enough to actually try this week. This week, when someone you care about says, I'm fine, and something in you senses that they're really not, say something back. not a challenging "are you sure," which can feel like pressure. Just something that opens the door. "You've been on my mind," or even just, "I've got time if you ever want to talk." You don't have to pry it open. Just leave it unlocked. Second, practice saying something true to someone safe. Not your deepest fear necessarily, just something real. Something you would normally smooth over or skip past. Notice what happens. Notice how it feels, both for you and for them. And finally, bring the blankets or the small case or whatever your version of ginger chews might be. You don't have to wait until someone is in crisis to show up for them. You already know what people around you are carrying. You don't have to wait for a cancer diagnosis to act on that knowledge. And this last one is for you. Ask yourself honestly, where in my life am I still performing wellness when what I actually need is for someone to know what's really going on with me? Sit with that, because the connection I'm describing, the realness, the tenderness, the feeling of not being alone in something hard, it's not only available in crises, it's available in ordinary life if you're willing to be the one who makes the first gesture. Thanks for being here today. If this one inspired or challenged you, please share it with someone. Sometimes the most real thing you can do is hand someone something and say, "This made me think of you." Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for being here with me today. I'm happy we're on this journey together. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, maybe a moment of pause, a little insight, or something you can carry into your own life. To stay connected, follow Becoming Real. Share it with someone who may also need it. And if you have a minute and you feel kind, please leave a review. It helps more people find the show. And if you want to go deeper than this podcast can take us on these and other topics, consider joining our community where the real conversation continues at the link in the show notes below. Until next time, this is Becoming Real.